a solution.
Abandoned buildings.
A larger economic problem.
15 years ago, this neighborhood was extremely blighted. Over 50% of the properties were abandoned buildings or abandoned lots, and we had a very challenging drug and crime problem, and also health issues that came from all of the blighted houses. Well, we have been working with Build and 5 churches in the community to try to make some changes, and in 2002, we had a significant tragedy when the Dawson family house was firebombed by a purported drug dealer. Angela Dawson was protecting her corner, did not want drug sales going on, didn't want to influence her children or the dangers that are associated with it. And so what we decided to do was that we were going to take on trying to rebuild our community.
This particular area went through a 20-year visioning process. In 1998, what this community would look like in 2018. And one of the things they wanted was a community center built in West Baltimore to focus on particular services. So that's where we are, this community center that was built in 1998. I think the most important value that Bon Secours Community Works offers for this neighborhood is hope. And another word that we use at Bon Secours is liberation. We really focus on providing programs to help people reach their potential, no matter what their barriers are. We really need to focus on the reentry population, and we really need to focus on youth development. But we can't do it alone.
We believe that East and West Side, where the neighborhoods are most challenged, where unemployment rates can be well above 20%, where poverty rates are very, very high, that those neighborhoods in particular needed a concentrated effort to create jobs for people who were returning from incarceration, people who had minimal skills or had minimal access to opportunity to acquire those skills. So we thought if we could create this enterprise and make it an easy, low barrier to entry to get in, that people could amass the skills once they were in, and they'd be marketable on the backside of their employment with us. We've seen individuals now over the course of our 6th year of existence who have traveled that path.
Before we began our transformation process of this campus, these buildings which we are working on, the area was a water pumping station for the city of Baltimore. We took ownership of the buildings in 2016. The number one need in Broadway East and in Baltimore City that the Baltimore Food Hub aims to address is jobs. The people of Baltimore City need more opportunities for work. Right now, the demographic of the area that surrounds me is that there's an unemployment rate that's in excess of 25%. 60% of the people that live in our catchment area actually don't own a car. And 48% of the people are below the federal poverty line, and not just at the federal poverty line, but actually deeply below it. The average commuting time to work of a resident in this neighborhood is 45 minutes, and yet I'm 1.5 blocks away from the School of Public Health for Johns Hopkins, and also probably about 12 blocks away from the medical school. This entire campus is a food campus, and the overall plan is basically about bringing catering businesses together. It's about bringing food halls together, breweries. It's putting them all on one campus so that they can feed off of one another's synergies.
Bon Secours Apartments is just one part of how we're trying to create an environment where folks are able to live their lives in the way that they like to live their lives. In other words, they're raising their families, they're going to work, they're pursuing their careers, and we're just trying to provide the opportunity to do that in a safe environment that's affordable.
Rebuild Metro is a nonprofit community organization that was founded by a partnership between the Reinvestment Fund and BUILD, Baltimoreans United Leadership Development, to create economic growth and opportunity in East Baltimore. So to do that, we've literally rehabbed hundreds of abandoned properties for both homeownership and rental. We've helped build parks and hoop gardens and neighborhood lots. We've established a coffee house at the corner of Preston and Broadway. The concept that we've been working on as part of the Build from Strength is really the recognition that if we work by ourselves to focus on this area, and that's all we do, that is insufficient. Really what you want to do is create a much larger sense of community, a much larger sense of the investment area, so that our money is just a piece of a much larger puzzle, a much larger flow of capital into the place. And when that happens, the capital pathways are repaired, and the next thing you know, you see lots of different investment that is feeding off of one another, and a much more virtuous cycle of redevelopment and reinvestment happens.
So good afternoon. My name is Teresa Singleton, and I am the Senior Vice President of the Community Development and Regional Outreach Department for the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. It is my distinct honor to kick off this year's Reinventing Our Communities Conference, which is being held for the first time outside of the city of Philadelphia and here in the beautiful city of Baltimore. Today marks a new chapter in the history of this dynamic gathering, and not simply because we chose to move it down I-95. This conference came together through the close collaboration of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Johns Hopkins University's 21st Century Cities Initiative, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. The video we just watched is a great reminder of why we decided to move this year's conference to the Charm City. Those of you who live or work here, and those of you who were lucky enough to have gone on a community tour this morning, know that Baltimore is a city that is actively confronting its challenges, working to raise up issues of equity, and having honest and sometimes difficult conversations about who is being left out of the American dream. These are conversations that need to be had in many communities across the country, and I believe that's probably what brought most of you to this conference today. The lack of economic mobility and equitable opportunity continues to hinder economic growth and economic mobility and equitable opportunity across many pockets of America. Poverty remains a stubborn reality for many of our neighbors. In small-town rural America, in cities, neighborhoods, and increasingly in our suburbs. In order to strengthen our economy in ways that enable greater economic mobility and prosperity, we must invest in opportunity. And this is the theme of this year's Reinventing Conference. With this theme, investing in opportunity, we are bringing focus on the ways in which policy and programs need to build, invest, and mobilize 4 types of capital: financial, human, physical, and social. During this conference, you will learn more about effective models and promising ideas that seek to build on those 4 pillars of capital. You'll hear about programs that help people build wealth and decrease crushing debt, address skills mismatches and invest in workforce development, transform housing and civic infrastructure, and empower citizens to come together to solve their community's problems. We will also hear from people, including today's keynote speaker, Wes Moore, about the personal impact that these issues have had on their lives. Through these perspectives on opportunity, we can better understand why our work to build equity matters and how policy can translate into opportunity for more people. In addition to the rich content presented at our sessions, both plenary and concurrent, we are pleased to share our special conference publication, which you should have found at your tables today. This publication highlights reflections from thought leaders, including Ben Hecht, Michael McAfee, Laurel Blatchford, and Ben Siegel on these critical topics. And they challenge us to think about the challenging conversations that we all need to have across the community development industry in order to move the needle on some of these issues. This conference is a reflection of the insights, expertise, and elbow grease of our colleagues at the Richmond Fed and Johns Hopkins. And I want to thank them for their hard work to help create a terrific agenda with special recognition of Ben Siegel at the 21st Century Cities Initiative. In addition to our co-hosts, I'd also like to thank the many co-sponsors who contributed to this conference, including the Federal Reserve Banks of Atlanta, Cleveland, Chicago, Minneapolis, and New York, as well as our funding partners who enabled so many nonprofit partners to join us here today: the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Enterprise Community Partners, Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, Meyerhoff Family Charitable Fund, and NeighborWorks America. I also want to ask you all to join me in thanking my colleagues at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and Richmond with a special recognition of the efforts by Noelle St. Clair, Sidney Diavois, and Peter Dolkart. If you could join me in thanking them. We know that the conference will generate conversations, ideas, and hopefully collaborations that will be just as fruitful as the ones that brought us here today. And we're going to ask that you all engage with us while you're here. So we're going to ask that you please download the conference app at Crowd Compass, and if you need some assistance with that, there are folks who will be willing to help you. This is a way for us to keep in touch with you, share updates and different information about the sessions and some of the resources that are available. And we also ask that you join our conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag reinventing18. And a number of you have already joined, and you'll see some of the Twitter feed going throughout the conference, and so we encourage you to participate in that conversation. Shortly, you will hear from Ron Daniels, the president of Johns Hopkins University. But please, I would ask you to join me in providing a warm welcome to Catherine Pugh, the 50th mayor of the beautiful city of Baltimore. Mayor Pugh is also a Philadelphia native, so we are making connections here already. And so I'm going to ask you to please join this dynamic mayor from this wonderful city of Baltimore.
We were doing some Philadelphia chit-chat. So first, let me just say welcome to everyone. I see one of my fellow mayors here. How you doing? But I also wanted to give a shout out to Ron Daniels at Johns Hopkins, because from the moment I won my primary, we have been such close partners. And I just want to thank you, because before I do that, I want to just relay a little short, quick story. When I won my primary, I had tea with Ron Daniels. And so he said to me, so what are you thinking? And this is our conversations all the time. What are you thinking? And around housing. I said, Ron, you know, I have this vision of how we create these lotteries. We got so many board-up houses. I've begun to assess where we are as a city. We own 2,000 some odd board-up houses. There are about 14,000 others in the city. And I'm looking at how do we create more programs where we create a lottery where we can give folks opportunity to own those houses. I remember the days of the UDAG grants when we had dollar house programs, but what most people didn't know is that you might get a dollar house, but you had to qualify for a $100,000 loan at that time in order to be able to fix it up. And literally tears were in his eyes. He said, Catherine, you gotta come over to Hopkins this weekend. We're doing exactly that. So if you all didn't get a chance to see the footprint of Hopkins over on the east side, where they invested some $35,000 per person to get people to live near where they work, and they are transforming the vision of what you see of Baltimore when you're riding in through the train station. Ron, thank you for being such a great partner. And you'll hear from Wes Moore, a friend of our city for quite some time, and I want to thank you ahead of time because I probably won't be here while you're speaking, but I already know what you're going to say. I also wanted to introduce Jim Smith and Pete Hammond, who are here somewhere back there. These are individuals who've worked with me on crafting my vision in terms of how we move our city forward. And I'm so grateful for the work that we've been able to do together, and our focus not just on building affordable housing, but also housing throughout the city, because we realize that we need to make sure that we're balancing all of what we're doing, and at the same time pay very close attention to the least of us. And I'm talking about the homeless. And I tell folks, you can't really fix the problems of the homeless, whether it is mental illness, drug addiction, or coming back out of the institutions, until you provide them with housing. And so I'm really excited that just last week we announced our $20 million Housing Affordable Trust Fund. That's in Baltimore City. And what folks don't know is that I had talked to the advocates long during the period of time when I was campaigning, but I said to them that I have to separate housing and community development from the Housing Authority of Baltimore so that there could be focus on both. And as a result of that, we are one of this nation's promised neighborhoods, where we received the $30 million Promised Neighborhood Grant, which will transform that part of Baltimore. I think some of you got to see that today, which will attract some $800 million in investment to help us to continue to transform East Baltimore. So we know that when cities are cash-strapped, oftentimes they look at their assets and they say, what can we sell? And Brooke, there was a conversation, we have Brooke Learman here, who's one of our delegates. There was a conversation about selling off the city's garages. And one who is a historian of Baltimore, I had read some time ago that we once owned our airport, and we sold that for $36 million. Can you imagine if we still owned it today? And so I said, we're not selling off any of our assets in Baltimore. And so what we decided to do was to maintain ownership, lease those garages, bond them, and we raised a $57 million investment fund. $50 million will go directly to investing in neighborhoods and communities that have been underinvested in for decades. And then to continue building up those neighborhoods and communities that have been underinvested in, we're working with community groups and helping them to establish their community development corporations so that we will seed them so that they can expand and take advantage of that opportunity. The reason we created this $50 million investment fund, and I'm saying this because I know you all understand Community Reinvestment Act and what banks can do, because this is an opportunity for you to invest as well. Because our goal is to raise $200 million a year over the next 5 years, because when we look at the number of boarded houses and neighborhoods and communities that have been underinvested in for decades, we know that that's what it's going to take. So we appreciate you all taking the opportunity to be here in Baltimore, but we can tell you that you're in the right place because transformation is taking place. We understand our challenges, whether it is reducing violence, helping the homeless, or creating opportunities, connecting social justice with economic opportunity. That is the intent of this administration. I also wanted to announce that I read an article that Ben Siegel had written some time ago about, is Baltimore going to be ready for opportunity zones? Absolutely. Not only are we ready, we're so prepared that we are bringing on someone, and I won't make that announcement, they'll make it themselves, to lead our Opportunity Zone effort. Because when I was in Washington, D.C., Ron, I had a conversation with Enterprise, who's been a great investor in Baltimore City around Opportunity Zones, and do you know and understand them? So what you should know is that since then, I've been a national speaker with mayors across the country about how they should be prepared. And so we submitted 44 Opportunity Zones in Baltimore City, and 42 have been accepted. We are 25% of the state's opportunity zones. And we just got word that Able Foundation approved our funding for the executive director of the opportunity zones that will lay out every single opportunity zone so that when investors come to Baltimore, we can tell you what your opportunities are, because we believe in P3s, we believe in partnership, and we believe in working together. We also, in my last part of my session as the majority leader of the Senate, along with Pete Hammond, we were able to bring back $1.2 billion to build 28 new schools in Baltimore City. We will build more new schools in Baltimore City than the entire state. And so we're excited because we believe that that is part of what we need to be doing in order to assure that those who live in our city, because millennials get it. We're in the top 10 cities where millennials want to live. So the two fastest growing populations, 18 to 34, 55 years of age and older, but we've got to keep those parents who are raising their children in our city. So we're building new schools, we're refurbishing new schools, and directly across from those schools, we're looking at how do we fix those neighborhoods. And just one example, we rebuilt Pimlico Middle and Elementary School. And directly across the street were all boarded-up houses. And here's what our housing department did. Our housing department went and laid the foundation for those houses and then lured a developer, and now we're able to offer mortgages to people who have children in those schools for $600 a month. That's working with the community, and that's how you rebuild. We have a commitment on behalf of the state of $75 million for our core program to help us tear down and rebuild some of those neighborhoods, and we'll continue to work on that. And I'll close with this. We understand what investment can do for a city, how it can transform neighborhoods and communities. And while we've had great partners in Goldman Sachs, who's investing some $260 million over in Port Covington, another $5 million in Center West, we realize that we need more investment. And we've had great partnerships with Bloomberg Philanthropies, also Johns Hopkins University, and what Johns Hopkins has done has spurred others to do as well. University of Maryland now offers $18,000 for people to live near where they work. And LifeBridge joined them with another $18,000 for people to live near where they work. In Baltimore City, offering $5,000 for people to live near where they work. We intend to grow our city, but we intend to grow it for the people who live here and the folks who will come. We believe that investment can change the trajectory of a city, and so we're excited. And so I say to all of you all, thank you for leaving my birth city and coming to the place where I've grown up, Baltimore. And I hope that you will enjoy your stay here. And I know that the collaborations and the discussions that you will have will help lead other cities to their greatness, because cities are important across this country. Building the right kind of transportation, building schools, building housing, builds people. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And Jim would not let me leave this mic without reminding you all that we really do understand CRA. We really do. And so we look forward to the partnerships. Thank you again. I got so enthralled with talking about Ron Daniels, I forgot that I'm supposed to introduce him. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of Johns Hopkins University, my friend, the next speaker, Ron Daniels.
Well, thank you, Mayor Pugh. As you can see and hear from the mayor's presentation, we just have a truly extraordinary leader of our city. She is irrepressible. She is incredibly engaged in all dimensions of the city's life. No one works harder for our city than she does. No one has a greater reservoir of ideas and aspirations for our cities than she does. And Mayor, we're just so lucky that you're at the helm of the city at this point in time. So thank you for being here today and for kicking off our conference. Let me welcome our distinguished guests, our colleagues and leaders from civic and community organizations, the Academy, philanthropies and industry from cities across the country. I obviously share Mayor Pugh's sentiment of appreciation that you are convening here in our hometown of Baltimore. And we're truly grateful to Teresa Singleton and our partners at the Federal Reserve Banks of Philadelphia and Richmond for their commitment, which we share to community development, and their willingness to reinvent their longstanding Reinventing Our Communities conference here in Baltimore with Johns Hopkins and 21st Century's Initiative as co-sponsor. And Ben, thank you for your leadership, not just in this conference, but for many years now at 21st Century Cities Initiative. I want to do a special shout out to Pat Harker, head of the Philly Fed. Pat and I go back several years. Some of you may know that I was born, raised, and spent the bulk of my career in Canada, but I did move about 14 years ago to the University of Pennsylvania as provost. And one of the great opportunities I had there was to work with Pat, who was a very successful leader of the Wharton School of Business. And Pat, in that capacity, your incredibly high academic standards, your ambitions for Wharton, the rigor that you brought to your leadership role was very palpable. And in truth, although the university has moments of hierarchy, president, provost, deans, and so forth, the truth is that although Pat was supposed to report to me, it was always an understanding that he was my partner, and it was a great collaboration, and we got a lot done together. And since that time, Pat's leadership obviously took him to a very successful run as president of Delaware, and now back to Philadelphia. But it's great that you're here. And I remember very distinctly, Pat, when you phoned me some time ago and said, did you think we would be game to do this conference with you? And we jumped at the opportunity. So thank you for that. Now, I would really love to be able to say that collaboration, partnership between us and the Fed has its roots in a longstanding historical partnership. But sadly, the historical record tells a very different story. In 1914, not long after the Federal Reserve System had been authorized, Baltimore and Richmond were locked in a ferocious competition to be designated as the reserve center for the 5th District. And ultimately, Richmond, as you know, won the day, despite going back through our archival material, seeing a pretty robust case developed by the very unbiased Baltimore Sun that found that the success of Richmond was accomplished by a fair amount of foul play. Those wounds are still with us here in Baltimore. But I don't mention this moment in history of our cities in order to adjudicate a century-old rivalry. Rather, I think it tells us something about the importance of local and regional institutions to a place, and the value of such institutions, large and small, when they remain embedded and invested in the communities of which they are part. We are here today to work not in opposition to one another as we did in 1914, but in concert to examine the ways in which all of us who are devoted to our communities can make meaningful impact and investment in our cities. Philadelphia, Richmond, Baltimore, all cities that represent areas of great promise paired with not inconsiderable challenges. Cities that have had to face entrenched racial and economic inequities and the troubling policies that they have shaped. Cities whose complex challenges surely resonate with many in this room, wherever you hail from. But let me speak specifically to Baltimore. As president of Johns Hopkins, now entering my 10th year, I am keenly aware of Baltimore's immense resources and potential, as well as its trials. I'm equally aware of the role that Johns Hopkins has played here. Indeed, our university and medical system's history is inextricably linked from our founding to the city we've called home for 142 years. As often said, Johns Hopkins is not just in, but truly and determinedly of this city. And as one of Baltimore's anchor institutions, we have a responsibility to this city that is both instrumental and moral. Although we have not always lived up to our ideals, we remain committed to harnessing our intellectual, financial, and convening capability for the improvement, for the strengthening of the city. And this commitment is manifested in a myriad of ways through our ongoing partnerships with many stakeholders, a number of whom are in the room right now. It is evident in our longstanding partnerships with the Baltimore City Schools to create and sustain new programming, including an innovative high school to jobs pipeline program based in one of the most challenged neighborhoods in our city. That's P-TECH. It's a program that we brought from New York and with the help of IBM to the city and to the state of Maryland, and we're very proud of our role in that program. It has formed the basis of our collaborations with community, civic, and business leaders to strengthen neighborhoods, from the launch of real estate development funds for projects that would not receive funds from traditional sources, to the operation of a new public school in East Baltimore, which some of you might have seen, to the creation of a new park and housing as part of a landmark 88-acre urban renewal project in East Baltimore, one of the largest urban redevelopment projects that has been undertaken in the United States. It's driven our collaborations with the city to support violence reduction programs here, including ROCA, which is focusing on providing support to young people in order to disrupt the cycle of poverty, crime, and incarceration. And it has spurred the creation and expansion of our economic inclusion program, Be Local, a network of 27 Baltimore area institutions that in the wake of Freddie Gray felt it was really important for us to come together, set clear goals around the way in which we buy, build, and hire people within the city of Baltimore, and to use this as an opportunity to create a significant bolus of new jobs in the city. In short, we are committed to the city because we know that place matters. And it matters not just because of sentimental identification with geography or a long-standing embeddedness in cultural norms. Place matters because it determines opportunity. And the evidence here is clear and resounding. As economists Raj Chetty and Nathaniel Hendren showed in their landmark 2015 study of the 100 largest counties in the nation, Baltimore City ranks among the lowest in terms of intergenerational mobility. Each year a child spends in Baltimore reduces that child's potential earnings. Thus, children who live in Baltimore for 20 years generate a total earnings penalty that they carry through life of roughly 14%. And place matters because it determines longevity. In Baltimore City, residents of our most affluent neighborhoods have a life expectancy almost 20 years longer than residents of our most disadvantaged communities. We're just blocks from one another, and yet we're living with these gaping differences in life expectancy. These haunting figures indicate that the story of Baltimore has long been one of deep contradiction. On the one hand, ours is a city that remains in the grip of stubbornly persistent and deeply felt challenges. A lack of economic opportunity, limited educational opportunities, and concentrated crime that rends our communities and annihilates the futures of so many children and so many communities. It's heart-wrenching. But Baltimore also is a city of extraordinary creativity, optimism, and unwavering commitment to the communities of which we are part. It's a place that fosters the growth of new businesses, including family and neighborhood businesses that find support through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program and our own Be Local, Build College. It is a place of enviable assets, our proximity to the nation's capital, and federal research centers, a roll call of strong anchor institutions, including academic research institutions and medical centers, great national foundations, including Casey, Weinberg, Abel, and Meyerhoff, another co-sponsor today. Thank you, Buffy. Businesses like BGE, Under Armour, M&T Bank, and T. Rowe Price, and community leaders and citizens, all of whom are fiercely dedicated to this city and its possibilities. The question for us, as for so many cities whose histories are built on foundations of deep and troubling contradiction, is simply this: what does it take to ensure that we are effectively and actively investing in opportunity, not just for the few, but for all our citizens, so that we can change the trajectory of the story from one of dissonance to one of concord and of shared growth and prosperity? As our colleagues articulated so well in the essays penned in advance of this conference, to be successful takes clear-eyed analysis of the root causes of inequity, especially in the odious and indefensible racism that has far too long shaped public policy and undermined opportunity. It takes concerted and coordinated efforts by institutions to align their resources and commitments effectively to make a measurable and enduring impact. It takes both the desire and the persistence to partner effectively with individuals and institutions across the public and private sectors. It takes a willingness to play the long game, approaching the work as a long-term value investment in a place and people that matter. Of course, vision and commitment are necessary, but they are not, we know, sufficient conditions for success. And here's where efforts like this come in. At Johns Hopkins, we're deeply committed to marshaling the applied research and data-driven analysis in which so many of you are engaged, and that lies at the core of the work of the 21st Century Cities Initiative and the Johns Hopkins Center for Government Excellence. Research that matches faculty capacity with the needs of our city and community partners and will allow them to understand the impact and effectiveness of interventions, policies, and programs as they unfold. Whether we are investigating gaps in small business lending environment here in Baltimore that dampens the prospects of Baltimore's entrepreneurs, as Mary Miller did and the wonderful work she did for 21st Century Cities, or using large-scale data analysis to better understand the pattern of vacancies in this city, or finally putting to rest the age-old question of whether children's vision affects their ability to learn in the classroom, we are working to put rigorous academic research into the hands of stakeholders, from policymakers to patients, in order to shape, indeed to force, better outcomes. But when we consider, of course, the right amalgam, the perfect balance of policies, culture, change, resources, effective institutions to move a city or community forward to a better future, there is, of course, another key element, and that is effective, dedicated, unstinting, and courageous leadership across sectors and institutions. And here today, we're fortunate to have among us so many people who fit that description, including leaders like our amazing mayor, whom you heard from earlier, and who has redoubled her commitment to violence reduction, to working with partners to loosen the grip of poverty and incarceration that robs young people their future, and to partnering with all of us to create jobs and erect bridges to economic opportunity for our neighbors and neighborhoods. And of course, we have another great advocate and leader here, Wes Moore, and I'm trying to be really dispassionate, objective about this because he's a Hopkins alum, but this happens to be true. Wes's life took him from Baltimore and the Bronx to the halls of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and to the battlefields of Iraq. Luckily for Johns Hopkins, as I said a moment ago, Wes' paths crossed with ours, and we're very, very proud to call you one of our own. Clearly, Wes is no stranger to facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, and he has at every stage met them with insight, courage, and unwavering grace under pressure. Now he's CEO of Robin Hood Foundation, and in that capacity continues to bring his unique amalgam of humanity and determination to the work of creating social and economic mobility for citizens and communities across the country. Wes, we are, as ever, delighted to have you here with us today. Welcome home, Wes Moore. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am first to Ron. Thank you so much for not just the wonderful introduction, but for the leadership and the guidance that you continue to give to my alma mater. You've made it very clear in your tenure that the work of Hopkins is, to your point, not just to be in Baltimore, but of Baltimore. And the truth is that the destiny of Hopkins completely moves in line with the destiny of Baltimore. Thank you for taking that seriously. Thank you for your leadership and for what Hopkins continues to give to our community. You know, it's interesting because when I remember when I was I first went to a two-year college, went to a junior college. And when I was getting ready to finish up my junior college experience, I had a chance to speak with the, at that time, director of admissions at Johns Hopkins. And he was talking about Hopkins, and you know, he knew that I was from Baltimore, so on and so forth. And then I started asking about, you know, the admissions requirements and test scores. And as he started rattling off the average numbers very quickly, I was like, well, that's probably not where I'm going to be headed. But I had a wonderful conversation with this gentleman named Paul White. And I went back, and on the urging of my advisor, finishing up my two-year college, I put in an application to Hopkins. I kind of forgot about it, to be very honest. And then about 4 months later, I received a big packet. Because back then we used to give like packets or envelopes if you didn't get in. And I got a big packet. To this day and until I have my last breath, I will know and appreciate the fact that the reason I got a big packet and not a small envelope is because I had an advocate on the inside. I had someone who was willing to fight and advocate for me in a position of power. I had someone who was willing to see something that maybe other people wouldn't see or other people might not fully understand on a piece of paper, but could understand the value of an investment and what it could mean. And I say with that packet, Paul White changed my life. And I'll be forever grateful. Johns Hopkins changed my life. And I'll be forever grateful. And I think it's an important narrative that I remember even as we think about the work that's taking place here right now, and to Pat and you and your team for not just choosing Baltimore, because that's fantastic that you guys chose Baltimore, but by choosing to not just spend time inside of a conference hall, by choosing not just to go to have a wonderful lunch in a beautiful hotel, but by saying we're going to go spend time in the community. We're going to go spend time in neighborhoods. We're going to go spend time with activists. We're going to go spend time with elected officials. We're going to go spend time with community leaders. We're going to go spend time with nonprofit leaders. We're going to go spend time and truly understand what it is to step outside of our space, to be uncomfortable, and to understand that the work of the reserve is never just simply going to be about a conversation about capital allocation and capital flow. But the work of the reserve is to make sure that we are having a more inclusive conversation about what it means to make sure that more people are participating in the conversation. That's the power of the agenda that's been pulled together so far. And so whether you spend your time while you're here, your time in Patterson Park or Park Heights, whether you're spending your time in Oliver or whether you're spending your time in Mount Vernon, understand the interconnectedness, not just of this city, but the interconnectedness of our larger economic flow and why that matters to all of us. So to all of you, not just for choosing Baltimore, but for choosing such a powerful agenda while you were here, thank you for that. But it is interesting, though, to be right here, right now in downtown Baltimore, because actually I think the history of downtown Baltimore is even illustrative. Because the truth is if you were to come to downtown Baltimore 20, 30 years ago, you'd see a very different downtown Baltimore. You wouldn't have seen the stadiums. You wouldn't have seen the restaurants. You wouldn't have seen the businesses. There was a deliberate decision to make sure that we could turn this area into an area where people from all around the globe can come and spend time and spend resources and watch the Ravens and the Orioles win, hopefully. Big win last night, by the way. But it was deliberate. It was intentional. There was an intentional decision to pour resources and focus and attention into an area that we could turn it into something that the whole world could look at and say, I'm going to come spend some time. I'll put my conference there. I'll stay in its hotels. I'll eat at its restaurants. There's a certain intentionality of progress. But I think, as Ron importantly pointed out, the history of this city is also about the fact that there's been a certain intentionality of inequality as well that we have to be honest about. Honest about the history and the role that redlining played in this city. Honest about the history that the role of blockbusting played in this city. Honest about the history and the role that discriminatory practices when it comes to who could buy a home and where, who would have banks lend to them and how, that also is part of our lore and our history. The same way we have to be creative and deliberate and intentional about progress, we have to understand that there was the same factors that went into place when we look at the certain levels of inequity that we now have to collectively unpackage. You cannot have a systemic breakdown without understanding the role of systemic buildups. Understanding what that means, and that it's not even just about the physical infrastructure, but that what we also have to attack is the level of frustration and disillusionment that exists in so many people's hearts and minds about where they call home. We can't act like the progress in one part of town and the inequity in another part of town is not noticed by everybody. We can't ignore the fact that we still have areas and prospects that look exactly the same as they looked in the 1960s. And what becomes our collective role in not just changing the infrastructure, but our collective role in terms of changing a narrative, changing a psychology, and changing the level of disillusionment that is still very real. And making sure that progress feels inclusive. Baltimore is my home. It still is my home. I still live in Baltimore, even though I've taken the role of becoming the CEO of Robinhood, so I'm spending a lot of time on Amtrak's. I passed Philly on the way up. But the truth is when I think about the role and I think about the place where we are organizationally, there also has to be a certain level of humility that we must take in this. Understanding the fact that Robinhood is one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country, based in New York, but we also have to understand that poverty is not a New York issue. And our ability to take 30 years of data and 30 years of understanding and 30 years of information must also then be used to think about how do we think collectively about import and export. How do we find things that are working in our current jurisdiction and find ways to export them? How do you find things that are working elsewhere and say, I want to know about them and why they work and what we can do to then bring them here? Because the truth is we know that there are certain best practices that are working. You know, Ron talked about the study that Raj Chetty and Hendren did around inequality and mobility. And he looked at all these different areas and looked at the top cities and the top jurisdictions where there was mobility. And again, not just mobility, but we're talking sustained mobility. Because the truth is, when we're talking about inequity and we're talking about poverty, there's really two spaces of poverty that we're talking about. You're talking about one, which is the more concentrated, generational poverty. And then you're talking about the other half, and literally it's about 52% of people living in poverty right now in this country, that for them, poverty is more of a fluid experience, consistently falling in and out of poverty, because a singular shock can push a person into poverty. And so really what Shetty and Hendren wanted to study with this understanding was saying, okay, if we understand that there's two different areas, where are the places that we have not just mobility, but where are the places that we have a level of sustained mobility, that we can move a person from one place to another, that we're not actually focusing on make poverty tolerable, but focusing on actually moving families out permanently. And they talked about some of those areas where it worked well, some of those areas where the highest numbers come from, places like Fairfax, Virginia, Shamahamish, Washington, Montgomery County, Maryland, where Montgomery County, Maryland was rated as the #3 place to actually provide mobility for people, and particularly in this study, they were looking at particularly young black boys. And Ron pointed out, it's absolutely right. The place that came in last was Baltimore City. 25 miles away from the place that came in third. And now if you look deeper into that study and you look deeper to understand, it goes back to another point that we think about deeply when it comes to not just philanthropy and Robin Hood, but this whole larger, bigger conversation is about the fact that policies do matter in this. This is not about politics, this is about policies. This is about the fact that I could literally walk into the office tomorrow morning and I could say, you know what, guys, new rules. Tomorrow, I'm making an announcement that we are going to put $25 million into education. $50 million in education, $75 million in education. And people would stand up and they would cheer and they would say, that's outstanding, that's such great leadership. And there'd be a headline in a newspaper, I'm sure. And then the reality will begin to set in that even if you take a look at New York City alone, the budget for the Department of New York City Education, the Department of Education in New York City is $25 billion. So the question isn't how can we put in capital that's going to change and shape and revolutionize. The question becomes how do we put in capital in a way that can be leveraged? How do we put in capital in ways that we know it can be transformative, because what it can do, it can unlock larger elements of capital. It can unlock larger elements of policy. It can create best practices that then policymakers can take a look at and say, this works, and I'm going to fund it. This works, and I'm going to scale it. Understanding the fact that we can talk about these other elements, and again, I applaud the agenda, because when we're talking about the different elements of poverty and the different elements of inequality and mobility that we're talking about, we're never talking about one thing. You know, I spend time with all of our community partners. And you know, I spend time with the people who we fund and who we focus on that do work in education. You know what they're most worried about? Mental health. I look at the people who we fund that are working on job training programs. You know what they're worried about? Transportation. Understanding is when people talk about what is putting people into poverty and keeping people into poverty, is it education? Is it criminal justice reform? Is it housing? Is it transportation? Is it mental, physical health? The answer oftentimes is yes. That's right. And so how do we think about these frameworks holistically with a variant of partners that can have clear and distinct roles in all of this? And then how do we think about this in a new and unique way when it comes to distinct partnerships? I say with the work that we do in Robin Hood, our power is not our purse. It's our voice. And our ability to exercise it and our ability to use it. Our ability to call things out. Our ability to be part of initiatives and part of partnerships where we're not concerned about the masthead or who the first name is mentioned or which logo goes on top. Where I say our job as an organization, all of our jobs as an organization, is not to get bigger. Our job is to make the problem smaller. And the only way that we are going to do that is by coming up with a collective form of build-up. A place where everyone understands their role and their lane, and we're able to have a collective goal, a measurable, data-driven goal. And know that in all of our work, we are going to be data-driven, but we're also going to be heart-led. We will never have honest conversations about the future of our communities if only a slither of the population is part of the conversation. And we will never have honest conversations about the future of our community if only a slither of the population is even being thought about. The city that you have chose to have this conference in, I think was beautifully put as a city of contradictions. It's a place where there is amazing momentum happening, and one of the most beautiful and exciting things I see about my city, about my home city, is the fact that you have a lot of people who are not waiting for permission to get things done. They're not waiting to be tapped. They're not waiting for a promotion. They're not waiting for a title. They're just simply waking up in the morning and understanding that there is work to be done, and why am I not the person doing it? And they're getting it done, and you will see that repeatedly throughout the course of this day and throughout the course of this conference. If you do not walk away from some of the stories that you will see and some of the stories that you will hear, some right after me and some with some leaders who I know, who I've had a chance to see and move me every single day, that's the thing that gets us fired up. A clear understanding of how much work needs to get done, but a clear understanding that we got people who are ready and willing to do the work. And an understanding that exceptions can never be enough. You know, oftentimes I think about this narrative that's even pulled around my story. The idea that I was 4 years old when I watched my father die in front of me. The idea that my mother then moved us up to the Bronx to go live with my grandparents. The idea that by the time I was 11 years old, I had handcuffs on my wrists. This idea when I was 13 years old, I got sent away to a military school. The idea that when I was there in military school, in the first 4 days, I ran away 5 times. It's actually 6. But oftentimes people will talk about that, and they'll talk about this journey. And there's this narrative around it that, well, isn't it great you got sent away? Isn't it great you got picked up and moved out of your neighborhood? Isn't it great that you moved and went from Baltimore to the Bronx to Pennsylvania, and all this kind of stuff, and you finally found your way? And the truth is that I will always be thankful for the opportunity that I had. The opportunity to remake my own identity. But what happened to me wasn't the fact that I was picked up and moved around. What happened to me wasn't the fact that I was physically transported. Me moving from Baltimore, the Bronx, to Pennsylvania, whatever, that didn't change my way of thinking. What changed was that I found myself surrounded by people and frameworks and institutions and platforms and policies. People who helped me to understand that the world was bigger than what was just directly in front of me. People who helped me to understand that the world was bigger than what was directly behind me. People who helped me to understand that we lived in a beautiful and a bright world, and I actually had a place in it. People who helped me to get that there was never going to be any accidents of my birth, not being black, not being poor, not being from Baltimore, not being from the Bronx, not being fatherless, that was ever going to define me, nor never going to limit me, nor anything that I should ever be ashamed of. And so in essence, what they did was they taught me what it meant to be free. Freedom. A freedom to exist in my own space, a freedom to exist in my own skin. And know that the hopes that I have, I'm not the only one that has them. That the aspirations that I have, that there are other people who are aspiring with the same passion. The fact that I know that every single room that I'm in, I'm there because I belong there. I'm not there because of some social experiment. I'm not there because of benevolence or kindness. I'm there because that room would not be complete if I wasn't there. What we are asking for every single soul in this city, every single soul in Philly, every single soul in Richmond, every single soul is that they can taste the same freedom. And that we know that we have institutions and frameworks, our governments, our nonprofits, our institutions of higher education, our nonprofit providers, our foundations that are willing to put in the work to make sure that those same freedoms can actually be felt and understood. That we're all willing to humble ourselves with this idea that while for none of our institutions, the world doesn't revolve around us, but progress doesn't exist without us. Our necessity to be able to fight for those who need and deserve an opportunity matters. And our ability to make sure that success is not some cherry-picked exclusionary tale either needs to be real too. You know, I was speaking with Teresa earlier, who, by the way, I just want to also very publicly say how incredibly inspired we are by you and your leadership. So thank you. And we were talking about the book that I wrote called The Other Westmore. And it's a story about two guys in Baltimore. And where around the same time when I was a senior at Johns Hopkins University, how the Baltimore Sun wrote this article about this local kid who just received this Rhodes Scholarship. And the Baltimore Sun was writing a bit about my life and my childhood and how I was now this local kid who was now heading off to Oxford on this scholarship. And at the same time, they were writing a whole series of articles about four guys who one day walked into a jewelry store. And in the process of walking to the jewelry store, in the attempt to rob a jewelry store, ended up murdering an off-duty police officer. And I found out through these articles and reading it that one of the people who was there and involved in the robbery, I found out that we had a whole lot in common to include a name. that one of the people that the police were looking for that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for this crime was a gentleman whose name was also Wes Moore. And we were from the same area, both grew up in single-parent households. And so this story is really about the evolution of these two kids and what ends up happening that causes this split. But we spent some time kind of talking about that story, and it made me think about the title. Because to be very honest, it was my first book, and I didn't know the way the publishing industry really worked. And I didn't realize that everything you see on the inside of books is what the author wants. That's the author's ideas and the author's intent. Everything you see on the outside of books, like the cover and the title and the airbrushed author photos and all that stuff, that's what the publisher wants to share with the world. And the publisher will legally hold on to those rights for a reason, because the publisher knows that is their only chance to market to you as the consumer. So they will do whatever it takes on the cover and the title of a book to make it interesting, that people might actually go buy the book. It's their model, right? I didn't know that. I thought publishers actually cared about what authors thought. They called me up, they're like, Wes, we'd like to have a conversation with you about the title of your book. I thought conversation actually meant the English definition of the word conversation, which said we would like to discuss ideas back and forth, right? So they're talking to me, and I kind of cut them off. And I said, listen, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I thought about it. And there's like 6 titles that I really like. And I started rattling off all these different titles. I was like, what about Baltimore Suns, or All the Difference, or Out of Many, or End of the Innocence, or Life After Death, or whatever. And I had reasons for all of them, right? And so they kind of, and I told them, I said, so y'all can go ahead and choose between any of those 6 titles, because I'm good with any of them. And they look at each other, and they look at me, and they say, that's very kind of you. We think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about the other Wes Moore? And I told them, I said, I think that's the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. And they're like, what don't you like about it? I was like, there's a whole bunch of things I don't like about it, but let me go ahead and start with 3. I said, the first thing, I want to make it clear that the story wasn't just about these 2 kids. So by putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact? Right, that's one. Second thing, I said, what self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they have written? Right, you know, the other James Baldwin, the other J.K. Rowling, the other Stephen King, the other. It sounds crazy, it does. And the third thing I told them, I was like, guys, listen, no one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anyone care who the other Wes Moore is? And so when I said that to them, they laughed, and they were like, those are actually all really good points. And they said, the problem, though, is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right, it's not about you. And it's not about him. The name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title. It really does not matter, because the truth is there are Wes Moores that exist in every one of our communities. Every one of our neighborhoods, every one of our cities, every one of our homes. People who are either one decision or one policy decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. People who every day are straddling this line of greatness, and the problem is they don't even know it. The most important thing about the title is not the name. The most important thing about the title is the other. And the fact that our communities are full of others. People who are sitting there and waiting and hoping that we see them, that we hear them, that they be included in the conversations, that they be included in the policies we're making, that their hopes and their dreams are just as protected when we're making these decisions as ours are. And that we're thinking about how to have a level of not just momentum, but collective momentum. That our growing markets are important. Equitable futures are tantamount. making sure that as we're spending time talking about the future, that all voices and souls are being heard and protected in that future. I'm incredibly grateful for the fact that you guys have chosen the agenda that you have chosen. I'm incredibly grateful that you all are spending time in Baltimore, but not just spending time in Baltimore, but spending time in Baltimore. Spending time with the people and the communities and the organizations that make this city so sticky for all of us who call home. Cities that we will ride for. A city we will fight for. A city we will protect. A city we believe in. And a city that in many ways symbolizes the hope of what this country promises. Thank you all for what you do. And thank you for always fighting for the others. Bless you guys. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Daniel Davis, and I'm from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and I have the distinguished honor of introducing this next session to you. We are thrilled to have 4 wonderful presenters with us to share some of their story today, but before we do so, I just want to capture a little bit of what I feel like is a foundation to this conference. And I don't know about you, but I already feel like, and Teresa, I'm not going to do this, but I already feel like I could pack my bags and walk right on out the door because my mind is just saturated with what's been laid out as this foundation of opportunity. You know, it started with the video about Baltimore. Can we get a round of applause for the folks who put that together? We heard straight from the community that opportunity involves taking on and rebuilding our communities. We heard from them that words like hope and liberation are reflections of the work that individuals are doing on the ground in Baltimore. Helping people fulfill their potential is what opportunity seems to be. We heard that opportunity is a concentrated effort, and another person on the video talked about feeding off of each other's synergy. And I love this quote that came towards the end of the video, where one individual mentioned that when it comes to opportunity, if we work by ourselves, that is efficient. But each of us are one piece of the puzzle. There seems to be this idea about collaboration that comes into pursuing opportunity. And then I feel like we just received a master class of what opportunity means from the folks who just graced this stage. We heard Ron Daniels ask and answer the question, what does it take to ensure we are investing in not just a few, but in everyone? We heard Teresa Singleton say that investing in opportunity requires honest and sometimes difficult conversations about who is left out of the American dream. And we heard Mayor Pugh say that we understand our challenges in the city of Baltimore. And she seemed to indicate that that is a prerequisite for pursuing opportunities, because she said the city's aim is to connect social justice to economic opportunity. Sometimes I think about social justice and it's this vague, abstract concept, but I love the way that academic Nancy Fraser describes it, where she says that social justice is the ability to interact as peers within society. The ability to interact as peers within society. Isn't that the kind of opportunity so many in this room are seeking to create? And then we heard Wes Moore say you cannot understand systemic breakdown without understanding systemic build-up, which leads me to think that opportunity is about rethinking and rewriting the narratives that drive our systems and our structures, because that, in doing so, will transform the lives of the individuals who live in our communities and ultimately society as a whole. But don't take my word for it. We've brought these 4 folks into the room today to explain their perspectives on opportunity. Each has accepted the challenge to take just 15 slides and 5 minutes to tell their story about what opportunity means to them and the work that they're doing in their communities. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker to come to the podium, Joyce Bacon with the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative.
Thank you so much. I was born in a system that impedes opportunity, a system of poverty, a system that right out of the birth canal, I was told you can't, or you could only do, or you would only be able to go but so far. Growing up in public housing, a community that lacked hope, living in poverty, there is a constant level of stress that controls your daily activities or non-activities. I remember feeling depressed and down as a result of my circumstances and the unwise decisions I had made. I became a single mother at the age of 18, and my first child with special needs, diagnosed with autism. I dropped out of school due to embarrassment and shame of being a single parent, and I had a son who would later be abused by our babysitter and suffer traumatic brain injury and shaken baby syndrome. There were back-to-back situations of distress and trauma, but what topped them all was experiencing domestic violence. I had gone through so much, and I felt like I was drowning in my situations. Being born into poverty, suffering the experiences as a result of, I was drowning in despair. Drowning, praying. I began praying that one day that God would help me to be able to break free because I felt like my mind was in chains. I prayed that one day the sun would shine on my behalf, and when it did, I would not be afraid to go outside and embrace opportunity. Miraculously, I made it to shore. I began to see my life with a different perspective. In the eyes of my Creator, to know that not only did I overcome those situations, but I overcame them, and I'm still in my right mind with the ability to achieve. So I went back to school. I did all that they told me to do. They said in my community, if you obtain your high school diploma, if you obtain a technical or a certification or go to a secondary school to obtain a trade, then you can be successful. So I went back and obtained my high school diploma, and I obtained a certification in computer programming. I wanted to be successful. Living in my community, there are new developments going up over all the time coming from West Philadelphia. And I look across the river and I see all these beautiful buildings being built. And 10 blocks down the street that way, new developments, new buildings, new businesses, new opportunities to embrace. So I go with my tools, my diploma, and my trade that I was told if you obtain those things, you can be successful. And I began knocking on the door of opportunity. And to no avail, I was being told no, because there was an invisible barrier that separated us from the community, from the new developments and buildings that were going up. I knocked on the door for opportunity and was told no without an interview. I heard of a program in the community, an economic development program called University City District, West Philadelphia Skills Initiative. They were offering residents of the community an opportunity to connect to Children's Hospital, the #1 hospital in the nation. I said, that sounds good. So I applied. I was accepted into the program. During the course of the program, they taught me what I call power skills. Some of you call them soft skills. Skills that work on your confidence, skills that help unlock the potential that was already on the inside of me and cultivate those talents, things that I did not know was there because of the things that I had suffered. I gained confidence, Not only did I obtain the position with Children's Hospital, but I worked as a patient sitter, which was an entry-level position into that institution, and was promoted in 6 months to an inpatient clerk. That was just the beginning. Through that program, I realized that I was able to overcome growing in a dry place. And if I was able to do that and persevere and survive, it touched my heart so much that I wanted to be able to give back. I thought about the other residents that are out there seeking opportunity, that have the skills, that has the talent, that has the ability, that are knocking at the doors of these institutions and cannot get in. So what I did was I obtained my coaching certification because I wanted to be able to help. And I started my own coaching business, and I went back to that skills initiative 3 years later and was contracted to be their certified professional development coach. Who better to help the residents overcome and achieve than me? Somebody that has gone through the process, somebody that can identify with the pain, somebody that can identify the struggle. I love what I do. I'm able to meet the participants where they are, if they're here, or wherever they are. I was given a chance. The door of opportunity was open, and like myself and many other residents, I was able to charge through it. I encourage you today, the residents of the community, not just Baltimore, but Philadelphia, we are gifted, we are talented, we just need opportunities. There's an invisible barrier. I asked you, what is that and why is that? I beseech you to crack open your doors of opportunity, and I guarantee you there will be people like myself that have overcome and been resilient, that will charge through those doors and be the best human beings, be the best professionals that we can be. Crack open your doors.
Our next speaker will be Kendall Jameson from Thread.
Good afternoon. There were times in my life when I felt deeply discouraged and overwhelmed. Opportunity and the belief that I would succeed were distant thoughts. Looking back at my childhood in Northeast Baltimore, my life began to unravel in middle school. Mom was struggling to hold down 2 jobs, food was scarce, and evictions caused us to bounce around from place to place. But things began to look up when I entered Dunbar High School in 10th grade. I joined the football team and I studied hard, but I quickly realized all of my responsibilities would be difficult to juggle. I was trying to take care of myself, and I didn't have a lot of supervision. Taking care of yourself wasn't always easy. It became obvious that I could use help in order to remain eligible to continue to play sports. 14 years ago, Sarah Heminger showed up at Dunbar High School, and she asked 15 young men and women to join her program. She lured us with pizza. But together, we decided we would focus our time on academics, team building, and community service. Now, I know this sounds like a bit of a fairy tale, right? 15 kids signing on for all of this. But as I mentioned, I needed help with my grades, and I thought Sarah and her friends could help me. So honestly, food and tutoring were enough to get me to come to the school library each day to study before practice. My grades began to improve, and Sarah, her husband Ryan, along with my classmates, and a group of students from Hopkins all quickly became a constant source of encouragement. You can call them my Thread family. We went camping in the middle of the winter, we learned how to ice skate, and we even did community service with organizations like the Maryland Food Bank. I remember going there to help serve food on Thanksgiving. It felt good to be on the giving end rather than always receiving. Now, when I started to look at colleges, Thread was here for me in new ways. My volunteers provided guidance. They helped me with college essays, and I even received funding for my college applications. The result were numerous scholarships, including a scholarship to Morgan State University. Now, that degree, along with the growing relationships I had with two of my Thread volunteers, Julia and Kendra, were life-altering. I mean, I was amazed at the interest that these women showed in me. We watched Ravens games every Sunday. We had cookouts. And I think they cheered the loudest for me at my college graduation. I could call on them anytime, and they were always there to answer. But if I'm honest, I was really focused on myself and my needs for the first few years. I would call them when I wanted help, and I would avoid them when I didn't. I'm not sure I had the insight to truly value the relationships that we were building. I didn't really grasp the depth of opportunity that their friendships offered. Well, looking back now, I'm humbled by the unwavering persistence of my Thread volunteers. When life wasn't going great, when I got discouraged, or when I got in trouble, I could call on them and they would answer. Even though we were totally different, we were total strangers, they accepted me, they respect me, and they listened to me. And that was new for me, and I thank for them. But that type of love stretches you. We were really different, but we were connected to each other in ways that none of us had been before. Today, I work at Thread as a community growth coordinator. I'm responsible for expanding Thread's reach by engaging new students, collaborators, and volunteers. I've come full circle. And now I'm the one giving opportunities to others. And because I am a Thread alum, I'm in a unique position to engage people by sharing my personal story. I know what it's like to struggle and feel lonely, scared, and isolated. But I also know what it's like to be a part of a network of caring people who show up for one another in the good times and the bad. I have experienced the power of relationships, and I'm truly appreciative for the opportunity that those relationships have created for me and so many others. Our Thread community is now made up of thousands of people who all want the same thing: the opportunity to live in a city that isn't divided by race and class. The opportunity to live in a city where people don't look at others as haves or have-nots. The opportunity to live in a city where people look at their neighbors all as valuable individuals with something unique to offer. So imagine what opportunity would look like if that were the case. Imagine what opportunity would look like if we were all willing to be vulnerable and engage in those types of relationships. Imagine what opportunity would look like if we all felt seen, heard, and loved. Well, I don't have to imagine, because I know. We would change the world.
Our third speaker will be Zue Kwok with Calm Clarity.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here. Good afternoon. For me, opportunity means being a bridge. To join two areas that are separated by a body of water, bridges are built to carry thousands of tons and withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. Likewise, a human bridge has to be extremely strong and durable to join communities that are separated socially. I am a refugee from Vietnam who grew up in this takeout restaurant in inner city Philadelphia, where gangs often came and robbed people and fought. I took the bottom photo on September 20th after a gun battle where over 40 bullets were fired outside my home. I'm also a Harvard graduate and a Wharton MBA who built a successful business career and wrote a book called Calm Clarity to share how I use neuroscience to heal trauma and serve as a bridge. I now teach this program to professionals and to inner city communities. As a first-generation college student, the culture shock that I experienced at Harvard triggered my untreated traumas to blow up into post-traumatic stress disorder. This put me in what I call Brain 1.0, or inner Godzilla mode, because I just wanted to smash things and to disappear. I then taught myself mind hacking to help my brain function better and graduated with honors. After Harvard, I lived in what I call Brain 2.0, or inner teen wolf mode, chasing happiness through career advancement and wealth. But as I achieved these things, it didn't really make me happy because my fear of missing out was so strong. So I decided to take time off to learn meditation techniques to strengthen what I call Brain 3.0, or inner sage mode, because I finally found the inner wisdom and peace I needed to be able to return to inner city Philadelphia and help more people break self-limiting patterns. Today, in this room full of policymakers, I want you all to understand that using carrots and sticks to motivate people activates Brain 2.0 and Brain 1.0. It works, but not without costs. It keeps people from developing Brain 3.0 and realizing their fullest potential. Another key insight is that emotional states are contagious. When we are in Brain 1.0, Brain 2.0, or Brain 3.0, we activate those states in others. It's only when we are in Brain 3.0 that we can make a positive impact. The ability to transmit Brain 3.0 can transform all of our relationships and our society. To develop Brain 3.0, we have to become aware of the triggers that bring us into Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0, and intentionally activate the neural networks that in Brain 3.0 that calm the inner Godzilla and inner teen wolf. I now want to touch upon 3 things that fuel Brain 3.0. First, compassion is the ability to be kind and nurturing to ourselves and others, even in the midst of great suffering. The neural networks for compassion is one of the most important systems in Brain 3.0. It quiets the inner Godzilla and inner teen wolf and amplifies the inner sage. Next, self-efficacy is an individual's belief in their innate ability to improve their situation and achieve their goals. Strengthening this system reduces mindless reactivity in Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0 and buffers against hopelessness and helplessness. Finally, the system for connection involves the vagus nerve, which connects the heart and brain. Stress and the fight or flight response turns off the vagus nerve and reduces blood flow to Brain 3.0. Social support, however, keeps the vagus nerve and Brain 3.0 online. One day, I heard a neighbor say, "I want a hand up, not a handout," and it stuck with me. It made me realize that handouts activate Brain 2.0 and make recipients feel subhuman. But a hand up emphasizes our inherent worth as human beings and activates Brain 3.0. We can all multiply opportunity by giving more low-income, first-generation college students a hand up so they can be bridges. These student officers of the Collective Success Network are already serving as bridges who give their families and communities a hand up. In closing, I would like to share my compassion meditation wishes with you. May you all be happy. May you all be healthy. May you all have calm clarity. Here's how to learn more, connect, and collaborate with me to bring calm clarity or the Collective Success Network to your university, your organization, or to your city. The book is also available outside if you want it. Thank you.
And our 4th speaker is Terry Spigner with Engine.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Terry Spigner. I'm the president and CEO of Engine. I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with each and every one of you. My journey is that of a son, a father, a husband, an entrepreneur, community leader, and a servant. I serve my community, I serve my family, I serve my staff, and I serve humbly those who I come in contact with. My journey started in 1967 as a big-eyed, bushy-tailed baby boy to a 16-year-old single mother, the oldest of 3 children. She was my first hero. She gave me the fortitude, the understanding that nothing was going to be given to me. I had to work for it. There was a lot of success in our life, knocking down challenges, because if you didn't knock down a challenge, you were going to get knocked down. So coming out of segregated Alabama in 1967, growing up and facing my different challenges in life, I found success. My success being one of the youngest senior vice presidents in one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. My success soon turned to failure, getting laid off from that job after serving 3 presidents. The 3rd president did not want me as part of his administration, and having to find out what is it that I'm going to do next in my life. I joined an IT firm as as a senior vice president, small firm in the 2002. 2006, I owned the firm. 2007, economy goes south. One of the worst recessions in the history of this country. So now I have to sit back, figure out what do we do now. Some people said the recession lasted from 2007 to 2009. In reality, for our company, it went through to 2011 because IT, the way businesses buy it, changed forever. It was a new normal. The bank that we've been with, a multinational bank, would not extend us the credit that we needed in order to sustain the downfall, so we had to go to a minority-owned bank, Industrial Bank of Washington, who collaborated with MMG, Stan Tucker, if you're in here, thank you, to give us the money that we needed in order to reinvent ourselves. And that was a great success, knocking down that Goliath of having access to capital in order to create the opportunity that we needed, not only for my family, for my community, and for my employees. That started in 2014, gave us the ability to refocus on how it is that we wanted to do business. How were we going to be the best technology company in America, in North America, not the best black one, but the best. We became ISO certified and CMMI certified, one of less than 2% of the companies in North America that have those certifications simultaneously. We were named one of the top 500 managed service provider IT companies in North America in 2017. Also number 26 of the 150 fastest growing IT companies in North America. This year we became one of the 250 tech elite IT companies in North America. Also one of the top 100 minority business enterprises in the entire metropolitan DC region, from Baltimore down to Washington DC and Virginia. These are things and opportunities that we were able to realize because someone took a chance to invest in our company. Also, from 2014 to this year, our company's revenue has grown 375%, which gives us the ability to reinvest in communities. In our community, at the National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., my wife and my name is on as the donor board. We donated up to this year over 300 pairs of boots to homeless veterans. We've created a paid mentorship program. Right now we've mentored over 20 students. Over half of them have become full-time employees, most of them from HBCUs. So that's what access to capital has done for me in my life. It's allowed us to be that servant, to be that leader, to create opportunity, while making sure that our staff and our company has a philosophy of tremendous, outstanding customer service, phenomenal customer satisfaction. Our philosophy and our motto is we want every one of our customers to feel like they're the only customer we have. I'm not satisfied until I get that comment from our customers, unsolicited. We are one of the most highly rated and certified companies because opportunity has allowed us to do that. There's not too many companies in North America that maintains as many certifications as we have with industry, which allows us to provide phenomenal support to our customers, but understanding that customer service is the most important thing to us. Our journey isn't over. My journey isn't over. My journey is just an opportunity for us to be able to do more, to do better, and to set a legacy of service to our community, to our employees, to use the money that we've made to make sure that our employees have opportunities. We don't have the money that Hopkins has to give the $18,000, but we do give each one of our employees $2,000 towards the down payment to their home. That's what we do to make sure that we can pass the opportunities that's been given to me on to the next generation. Thank you very much and have a great day.
The policies you pursue and the programs you deploy matter. Full stop. The opportunities that result from the work you do change lives. Full stop. You've heard today from these 4 compelling speakers, and I hope we all walk out of this room realizing that our collective challenge is to fuel these opportunities in a way that not only evens the playing field, but also tackles the systemic and structural obstacles that impede the pursuit and the realization of these opportunities. I think the best way that we could possibly wrap up this session right now is to ask these 4 folks to stand and to give them a loud round of applause. I just want to sit and hear more stories because they're so compelling and it makes a difference. So talk to each other, tell your stories to each other, because that's how we're going to know which opportunities we can really invest in as we go through this conference.